This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. Hi. What do you guys want to talk about? Thanks, guys. Back to you.
I never realized how hard it is to find bookshelves around here. I went to like 3 different places trying to find standard foldable shelving units. You'd have thought I was hunting for the Holy Grail. So what's going on, people? Aside from everything, I'm sweating my balls off right now. Literally got a nosebleed the second I started walking into my apartment. Anything else gonna go wrong? I could talk about the garbage speeding ticket I got, but it's really not that interesting of a story. Wrong place, wrong time. But other than that, things are looking solid. You know, I could dedicate an entire half of this podcast to recapping the 2024 election, since that's kind of the big central talking point amongst most of the nation. To draw an analogy from wrestling, it is literally the perfect rubber match trilogy in political history. From my vantage point. I guess it all kind of depends on who you perceive as the protagonists and the villains in that whole political storyline. But if you look at the Trump comeback through the lens of him being the babyface dating all the way back to 2016, it is a pretty great comeback story. You know, my dad said something really interesting a few days before the election. Something I never really even thought about too hard, but when you think about Donald Trump's personality, the walking gimmick that he already is, it kind of opened my eyes to the reality of the screwed up world we live in. But it was a good question. He asked me, do you actually think Trump wants to be president? And I thought about it for a minute. And then it hit me. I said, no. He just wants to win. He literally wants to right the wrong that was in his mind a corrupt 2020 election. Now, whether or not you want to argue the validity of that whole thing and how it went down, that's a separate entity entirely. But from Trump's perspective, he saw it as, they cheated me. The bad guys won round 2. So I'm coming back to settle the score. Rocky 3, baby. Or, what was the other analogy I saw somebody post in a live chat? The Star Wars trilogy. That's what it was. Yeah, part 1 was A New Hope. Part 2 was The Empire Strikes Back. And part 3 was The Return of the Jedi. And there's all kinds of symbolism caked into everything that went down on Tuesday night. Like I said though, man, greatest professional wrestling storyline in politics history. The 8-year Donald Trump saga going all the way back to 2016. You think about all the angles and the obstacles they threw in his way since. He overcame all the adversity, and he stuck it to the bad guys. Or at least who the vast majority of the nation would view as the bad guys. And on that beautiful figurative note, it is time to dive into some classic wrestling on today's show. Welcome to the podcast, everybody. This is the Five Starr Wrestling Report here on YouTube and Rumble on Mondays and Fridays. It is indeed the YouTube podcast that nobody knows and everybody needs. That is our mission statement. Make sure you comment, rate, subscribe if you have not already. Today is the Friday show, so we've got all the territory coverage to get into. I'm a little off my game right now because my schedule is very chaotic. Pretty sure this one's not going up until late Friday at the earliest. So apologies in advance. But we've already got a lot to dive into today, so let's get started with the Crockett review, shall we? Is it Starrcade yet? I'm just like so ready for 1988 to be done and over with. I still can't believe we got like another month and a half of television until the pay-per-view. It literally is just like we're regurgitating the same talking points at this point. Is it possible to have a problem where you've booked and promoted a card so far out in advance that it just kind of feels like treading water until you get to the actual pay-per-view? Like you've covered all the ground you needed to, so now it's just like, all right, let's just do the show. It's kind of where we're at with Starrcade 88. I mean, they've had like 90% of the card finalized since September. So now we're just kind of looking at our watches, wondering, is there any particular reason this pay-per-view couldn't have happened in November? You would have to talk to the Turner execs. Now, there was one piece of new business to address this week. And that was everything surrounding the Road Warriors beating the Midnight Express in New Orleans to win the World Tag Belts. And then subsequently, the follow-up angle they shot with the Midnight to the studio this week. Both of which were equal importance. And of course, these were very famous angles that Jim Cornette has recounted on his podcast over the years. We'll talk about it a bit later on. It most definitely facilitated the Midnight's face turn. After they've been teetering on the fence since Tully and Arn left the promotion a couple months back. Our first match is Ron Simmons versus Rip Morgan. I almost instinctually wanted to say Rip Rogers. Had to catch myself there. Could have also said Rip Oliver. And you know what's funny? The minute I saw the graphic pop up for Rip Morgan here, it got me thinking, have we ever seen Rip Morgan wrestle a single match on this show? He's been the designated flag bearer for the Sheepherders for so long. The thought never occurred to me before this match. When has this guy actually wrestled before? Well, we found out here. The answer was approximately 4 months after he randomly showed up on television replacing Johnny Ace. Which, by the way, I still don't think they've explained to this day. Now, of course, he still wound up being fodder for Simmons by the end. It was just a lot more competitive than what we're accustomed to seeing. literally the same talking points the announcers have been discussing about Ron Simmons matches for the last 2 months. They retired Simmons' old college jersey number when he played for FSU. He's trying to work his way up through the ranks and prove he belongs amongst the top names in the territory. I mean, at this point, it just sounds like an NPC talking. To be fair, the match is pretty good. Nothing wrong with it at all. I was actually kind of getting into it the longer it went. It was really interesting watching Rip here in particular, because he was a lefty, so everything he did in this match was pretty much the inverse of what you would normally expect to see from right-handed athletes. The way he would hit the ropes, the way he delivered clotheslines and big boots. Like, everything was backwards because he was trying to use his dominant side to execute all of his moves. And like, that's not new. I mean, we've seen plenty of left-handed pro wrestlers over the years. But it did kind of make me realize just how rare they really were. Or in the case of certain lefties, like, they would adapt to kind of modify their style to accommodate right-handed wrestlers. So it's kind of weird. But Ron did a little bit of selling for Rip. Things actually bled over into a commercial break when Rip was in control. They come back and do a few more minutes of back and forth. And then eventually Ron caught Rip with a spine buster for the 3, which immediately led to the Sheep Whackers jumping into the ring to try to go after Simmons, only to then get run off by Super Gilbert. And admittedly, I did kind of scoff at the visual of Ron fucking Simmons not being able to handle 3 guys on his own, but 220-pound, 6-foot Eddie Gilbert, he could just run in there and beat up all 3 guys by himself. Sure. We'll go with that. I mean, that part was ridiculous. Seeing 3 heels run away from Eddie Gilbert. Come on. And of course now, for reasons that they never properly explained until the minute we saw them together here, Eddie Gilbert has gone from teaming with Jimmy Garvin for all of 1 week to now they're trying to establish a tag team with him and Ron Simmons. Your guess is as good as mine. I don't know what's going on here. Nor can I explain how in the fuck Eddie Gilbert has gone from wanting to defend the honor of Gorgeous Jimmy by going after Kevin Sullivan and the rest of the Varsity Club to now he's an American patriot preaching about the red, white, and blue. He does this fired up babyface promo, giving us a glorified history lesson of all our international adversaries that burn the American flag. And now Gilbert finally has a chance to step up to those no-good commies. Now he can fight back. He doesn't have to sit around and watch people disrespect our country anymore. And, by the way, Gilbert tried to rip off a shirt here and get the people excited. I can definitely confirm one thing. Eddie Gilbert did not, in fact, have the body of Lex Luger. So when he took off his shirt here for the crowd, dead fucking silence. Nobody popped. So yeah, I had virtually no clue what was going on here. Apparently they're dropping whatever they had going with him and Gorgeous Jimmy feuding with the Varsity Club. Now they're going to shoehorn him into this U.S. tag title tournament with Ron Simmons and apparently ignore all the Varsity Club stuff. Can anybody else say with me, poor planning? So then we come back to check out the footage of the Midnights and the Road Warriors. And again, this happened a week ago during the Midsouth tour in New Orleans. They aired a glimpse of the tape during the cold open this week, but this is where we saw the entire angle from start to finish. And, boy, was this videotape indicative of a lot of things. You know, if anything, it proved the point I've been talking about when it came to Dusty's attempt at turning Hawk and Animal heel. The simple fact that it didn't work. Now, just to set the field here, because there is an underlying story, right as they're about to ring the bell, Paul Ellering pulls Jim Cornette down from the apron and starts going after him. That led to the pre-match brawl where Stan is over on one side of the ring trying to chase after Ellering and beat him up. Meanwhile, Beautiful Bobby gets posted and double-teamed by the Road Warriors on the other side. Comes up bleeding from the head. And then we basically get the story here where Bobby's down on the floor selling for most of the match. Stan's in the ring having to work by himself. And we do get the valiant comeback attempt from Beautiful Bobby at the end. He blind tags Stan and tries to go after the Road Warriors himself. And then it leads to him eating a clothesline from Animal and getting pinned in like 30 seconds flat. So they did everything to protect the Midnights in the fall here. You know, putting over the Hawk and Animal used every shortcut possible to win the gold. And as noted earlier, it facilitated a babyface turn for the Midnights that, I mean, if it wasn't already clear by the time Tully and Arn left earlier in the fall, it was sure obvious here. There's no way you're booing the Midnights after this. But, well, quickly going back to what I mentioned about the crowd, I'm sure there have been other signs of it recently, but this was one of the first times in reviewing a live event tape on Crockett Television where I just thought, man, this crowd is fucking dead. And I don't know what the issue was. I mean, the wrong kind of crowd to shoot an angle like this. The fans not wanting to boo the Road Warriors. The fans not wanting to cheer the Midnights. Some combination of all three of those points. I don't know, dude, but it was an ominously quiet room during the critical parts to this match. Like, even when Bobby was making his comeback at the end, it was just lifeless in the room. And I know they were already in a market that wasn't traditional Carolina territory, so maybe the fans didn't get it. But, I mean, whatever the issue was, this did not work. It was a great angle. It was extraordinarily well done by all accounts. But the room killed it. The lack of reaction for anything was just mind-boggling here. So, of course, we pitch back to the studio where David Crockett is trying to interview the Road Warriors. And, while they are certainly trying to be heels, they did their damnedest to be mean and cruel toward the babyfaces. And to say it came off very unnatural in delivery, that would be understating it. And they talked about how they're sick of having everybody's backs. Basically told guys like Sting and Luger and Dusty to stay out of their business. You know, they did at least establish that they're not going to be cowardly champions. They will defend the belts against any challengers. So they're not outright chicken shit heels. That's good to know. But, yeah, I'm starting to think that even Hawk and Animal weren't buying into this heel run. I mean, you just listen to him here. The first thing you think as a smart fan is, these guys are not comfortable working this heel gimmick. I mean, they can sound mad and try to maintain that tough guy persona, but the minute you have to have them call their former babyface comrades, Yeah, even Hawk and Animal, you could tell were like, this kind of sucks. It was easily one of the worst promos they've done in a long time. Like, there were multiple moments here where they got lost in their train of thought and probably wish they could have a do-over. Or in the case of turning heel period, how about a do not? So from there, we had the Russian Assassins going up against Terry Jones and Brett Holiday. No idea where Brad Holiday was this week. He sat the show out. I was kind of scared for a minute, too, because when I saw Brett Holiday here, I was like, fuck. That probably means they're going to have the other brother and another squash on the show. So I'd have to endure 2 shitty Holiday Brothers matches in 2 different squashes as opposed to 1. But, again, I don't think we saw the other brother this week. Oh, and for those keeping score, it is very important to decipher the two. Brett Holiday was the one that looked like a rolled-up Pillsbury Doughboy. Every single time he took a bump, just rows of tits sprawled all over the ring mat. Fucking vile. And again, the story with the Russians is that they're having the officials check their masks before every match just to make sure they're not concealing gimmicks. Of course, Teddy's methodically not checking the guy who's actually concealing the weapons, Paul Jones. So naturally, the Assassins are beating up both job guys. Eventually, they run a distraction spot so Jones can feed one of the Assassins a gimmick. He slips it into the mask, headbutts Holiday for the 3. And, while the story appears to be the referees are fucking dimwits. And the announcers are trying to figure out if it's a piece of metal or some kind of silver dollar. I mean, I guess getting headbutted by a coin would hurt, right? If you hit someone hard enough. Might be enough to at least leave a bruise. I've not tried it myself personally. Then we had Bam Bam Bigelow versus Trent Knight, which is rather uneventful, with the exception of Jim Ross expressing his fascination with Bam Bam's head tattoos. It was so funny. He literally could not get over the idea of somebody allowing another person to stick needles into their head. This just ruined JR. He was beyond flabbergasted. He at one point said, "They're even colored. That's not Crayola. That's the real deal." That's not Crayola. Thank you, Jim. Bam Bam won with a gourd buster. That's about all I cared to write down. Then they followed that with a promo where Oliver Humperdinck talked about Barry Windham and Ric Flair for a while. He did at least call attention to the reason we haven't seen Ric Flair on the studio show over the last couple weeks. Why he's been in hiding from Bam Bam. No, he was actually working dates over in Japan. He also randomly brought up that Bam Bam and Dusty are now going to be tag partners. Why? I don't know. He said about 5 years ago, he never would have thought to have anything positive to say about the American dream. But hell hath frozen over, apparently. And then Bam Bam actually chimed in here. He honestly had nothing to say other than the following quote: "Play with fire, get burnt." Then he paused and grunted at the camera. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what prompted Humperdinck to have Bam Bam speak here, but probably should have thought twice about that. Then we came back for Ric Flair and J.J. Dillon. And Flair was so excited to be back on television this week. He got a little tongue-tied here. His first comment was, "It's great to be back in the NBA." To which he immediately corrected himself by saying, "I meant the NWA. You can tell I'm excited for basketball season 2. At the same time, he's drawing attention to the Horseman fans in the studio this week. There were like 7 or 8 fans in suits. We've seen like the pack of 3 or 4 of them, but this was a whole army of Horseman fans. Now, we are still operating under the theory that the Horsemen are heels, but I mean, honestly, at this point, who cares about continuity? I can honestly say this was the archetypal Ric Flair takes about 5 minutes to say absolutely fuck all of nothing. He literally said nothing in this promo. He just screamed about how great him and Barry are, put over J.J. Dillon as the best manager in the world, said the Horsemen are the best thing going today. But he was passionate. And that's why the people loved it. He said jack shit, but he sounded coked out of his fucking mind. So the people went nuts. Ric Flair is probably the perfect tagline for the old truism, cocaine is a hell of a drug. Because you listen to him here, there's not a doubt in anybody's mind that guy was high as fuck. And then we pitch back to the ring for some good old classic white meat baby faces. Fantastic's going up against George South and Gary Royal. This actually ended up being a pretty fun little squash. Even though Gary Royal fucked up like every double team spot he tried with George South here, which is kind of what made it great. Because you could tell they tried to pre-plan a couple spots beforehand. Royal had no idea what he was supposed to do. He looked like a deer on ice skates in there, screwing up things left and right, completely out of place for everything. I like when the Fantastics tried to give him and South the do-si-do Irish whip spot. Royal messed up the spot so badly, he basically did a ballerina twirl in place until Rogers finally grabbed him and hit him with the atomic drop. I mean, at least he and South got the double clothesline attempt, which of course Rogers turned into a double DDT. That looked okay. But every other thing the job guys tried here looked awful. And then the Fantastics went over with their assisted senton out of the corner. And then we had yet another Yay America speech from Fulton and Rogers after commercial. This went a little bit better than their promo the other week where they just tripped over themselves the whole time. Fulton talked about how election season's coming up. So it's time to do what's right. It's time to vote for the right cause. And that cause is seeing the Fantastics beat those no-good sheep herders and take home the U.S. gold for all the good people of America. See, dude, this is why Donald Trump is so great at American politics. Because he gets pro wrestling. And he knows how to figure it into his rally speeches. This is exactly the kind of thing I would expect to hear out of a Trump rally. Like, I could hear him delivering that exact same dialogue. The election's about one thing, folks. It's about winning the gold and beating up those anti-American goons, the sheep herders, sheep whackers. Some people call them sheep whackers. I call them sheep herders. Because they hate America and they hate what we stand for, folks. Very bad people. Very bad people, folks. And of course, everyone cheers them. Oh, God, our country's so fucked. But you have to laugh. You absolutely have to laugh. I liked to hear Fulton started singing God Bless America. Then he just cuts himself off mid-sentence and goes, Tommy, take over. I'm going crazy over here. And you know what? Tommy actually covered for a good promo as well. Although he did say here that Americans have a famous phrase, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. To which I probably responded with, no. No rational-minded American actually thinks or says that. And if they do, they're fucking liars. Anybody that spouts that bullshit rhetoric is an idiot. I hate that phrase. It's good for the goose is good for the gander. Same people that spout that nonsense are the same people that believe in egalitarianism and equity for all. Fuck off. Oh, they also imitated the sheep herders at the end. That was good. Rogers did a really good mocking of Luke. It was very accurate. If only he could have gotten the lazy eye, then it would have been perfect. And then we had Lex Luger and Agent Steel. Luger won with the torch rack in like 2 minutes. Absolutely nothing else to say about it. And then he was at ringside for a promo, letting us know that he's in the best condition of his life. And he and Sting are ready for the challenge of their lives. He talked about a lot of stuff, as a matter of fact. This was very much stream of consciousness Lex Luger talking. All I know is he poked fun at the way the Road Warriors won the World Tag Belts from the Midnights. But when it comes to Sting and Luger, they are the number one contenders for the top 2 belts in the region. They're training every day in the gym to prepare for the showdown with the Road Warriors. And then right at the end he goes, Halloween is over, and we're ready. To which I responded with, what? The hell did Halloween have to do with any of this? Is it because the Road Warriors wear face paint? It is important to remember here too, and I think we talked about this the other week a little bit. They are currently advertising Sting and Luger against the Road Warriors for the belts. Keep in mind, the Starrcade match in December is Sting and Dusty versus the Road Warriors. So I'm trying to think now. I mean, logically, wouldn't it be the Clash of Champions that they're promoting for Sting and Luger going after the tag belts? Or at the very least, some kind of live event. I mean, it makes you wonder if they were actually considering making this the featured tag title bout for Starrcade instead of putting Dusty in the match. But then maybe things got shuffled around last minute and they went with Luger and Flair for the world title instead. There's a lot of weird activity going on in the lead up to Starrcade 88. I'd love to actually sit down with Cornette and properly go over the timeline. Because he's obviously done deep dive conversations into the classic periods in wrestling. And he's definitely covered this period. But obviously he's missing critical details along the way because we're only really covering the Midnight's timeline. But specifically from September to December of 88, I'd love to actually do a thorough timeline deep dive and talk about all this stuff because it's fascinating. Like, there's a lot of weird things going on right now with the cards. Did they actually know what they wanted to do for Starrcade 88 a month out? Or were they still playing around and unsure with it as early as November? Or even better, did Dusty have the card booked well in advance? And then the new regime kind of stepped in and started playing around with stuff? Speaking of Cornette, he and the Midnights were up next. And this was the big one. The big angle we've all been waiting for. And I don't want to get too far ahead of myself here. I want to at least build up to it. So we'll start with the promo at the podium. This was Corny's chance to relay everything that went down in New Orleans. He went over all the logistics of what we saw in that video recap earlier. The ups and downs, ebbs and flows in the match. But the main point he established here is that the Midnights have nobody to blame but themselves for losing that match. All because they trusted the Road Warriors would handle business the way they always did. But instead, they jumped the Midnight Express beforehand, and they used the dirty tactics against them. And Bobby and Stan got caught with their pants down. And now poor Bobby's in such bad condition, he can't even wrestle on television this week. I think he was actually hurt as a shoot, but I have to go back and check. And again, like I talked about earlier, this was basically a full-fledged Midnight's babyface promo. It was the first time you actually witnessed a scenario where the Midnights were kind of the sympathetic babyfaces. They still had the guts enough to fight through the disadvantage and try to make a valiant comeback. And yeah, they lost. But they still put up a heck of a fight. And that was the main story here. Corny told the Road Warriors that if they have the balls to get back in the ring with Bobby and stand down the road, they will give the Road Warriors the damnedest fight of their lives. But for now, because Bobby's in no condition to compete due to the injury he sustained the other week, Stan is going it alone against the Menace. And, no, fuck all that noise. This is where we got the other big newsworthy event for this week's program. An angle that people still talk about to this day, and holy cow, does it still hold up. So Stan's having his match. Bobby's on the floor watching. About halfway through, Tony Schiavone says that he's being fed information for a long-distance phone call that is currently being processed. So we go to a split screen. They got the old-school telephone hooked up to the podium here. Tony answers the call, at which point he passes the phone line off to Jim Cornette, telling him that the person on the other line is actually asking for him. Now, as of this point, we're not supposed to know who it is. If you already know based on the angle they set up, then of course it won't come across as a surprise. But Corny's reading this guy the riot act. He knows exactly who is on the other line. And he's telling this son of a bitch, if you have a problem with me and my Midnights, you can bring your boys to the studio and we're going to handle business here. But until then, eat a dick. And he slams the phone down. And probably about a minute or so later, as the announcers are trying to fish around for information on who Cornette was talking to, we hear Jim go, "Oh, Jesus Christ." And in the ring, who should we have but Dennis Condrey, Randy Rose, and none other than Paulie Dangerously, the fucking walrus himself. And he's got the big-ass phone with him. They immediately jump everybody in the ring. They powder Stan and Bobby. Dennis and Randy are putting the boots to him. Cornette tries to hit the ring to help out, but he eats a right hand from Paul. And of course, here's where we get the classic spot that became a staple piece of Jim Cornette's gimmick. The moment that sold merch years later as part of the Cornette Collectible series. And obviously, Cornette's got the all-white suit on. So naturally, when Paulie cracks the giant phone over his head, down goes Corny to do the blade job. And, well, he's a little bit rusty working with the blade since this wasn't exactly his forte. It wasn't all too frequent when we saw Cornette gig himself. So you see him on his stomach covering up on the floor, and he starts going to town on his forehead with like 4 or 5 swipes of the blade. And he recounts in his stories that it was already cold in those studio environments to begin with, so the blood's not going to immediately form from a single blade shot. So after he's ripping into his head with blade shot after blade shot after blade shot, well, eventually the blood starts pouring like a faucet. And even Jim Ross sells it on commentary perfectly. He's like, oh shit. That's a lot of blood. And you see Corny's eyes are totally covered, so, I mean, he can't even fucking see. And that's obviously where we get the famous Dusty line after they shot the angle. Great job, kid, but I think just get a little juice out there. And, well, let's set in motion the Midnights versus the original Midnights feud for Starrcade. As we mentioned before, it is pretty much the last remaining big storyline that they haven't started building up prior to the show. So they got the ball rolling here. And JR was fantastic, selling the impact of the story. Also making sure to point out that none of these guys work for the NWA. The original Midnights, that is. They're not under contract. Dennis used to be an original member of the Midnight Express, but not anymore. It was a really hot angle, too. The people were super into it. And obviously, as we continue in the timeline, you know, we'll talk about how this whole feud ended up falling on its face. Not for anything the talent involved did. It was just wrong place, wrong time, shitty management. Because remember, you know, right around the same time they started this program, this is when the Turner sale went into full effect. November 1st, I believe. You know, so we're going to see that as they continue to develop this feud on television, and there's going to be a handful of people in the office that don't take too kindly to it. There's going to be a lot of changes and a lot of fluctuation going on here. And by February of '89, I mean, the feud is basically done. Unceremoniously, with no real conclusive finish. But like I said, the angle still holds up to this day. Very well done. Everybody looked great here. The Paulie phone clocked to Cornette's head with a subsequent juice job. That was excellent. You know, the setup to it was great with Corny slamming the phone down on the podium. The execution was perfect. It's just the aftermath that left a lot to be desired. So then we had Eddie Gilbert versus Mike Jackson. A technically sound wrestling match that followed one of the hottest angles in all of 1988. What you would call the equivalent of following a shooting with a stabbing in the parking lot. I mean, the action here was good. Don't get me wrong. They worked a story kind of similar to one of the squashes Gilbert worked the other week, where it got physical the longer it went. Gilbert was arguing the use of a closed fist at various points. Then it kind of pissed off Jackson when Gilbert would go to use a closed fist of his own. So he kind of used that to work the psychology advantage. Then he went over with a hot shot stun gun. Then we had a pre-taped interview at one of the live events with Tony Schiavone and Dusty Rhodes. Dusty took a couple minutes to basically call out the Road Warriors. He explicitly let them know that there's not an ounce of steroid pumping through his veins. Just whiskey fighting a big heart. He said it's time for dues to be paid, if you will. Time for Hawk and Animal to put up or shut up. Whether it's singles or tag action, Dusty's waiting on the other side for a fight. And, I'm pretty sure he used his quote, funky like a monkey at the end. As I listened back to it again, I swear to God, it still sounded like he said fucking like a monkey. But maybe it was just the echo in the room. By the way, sidebar. Didn't Cornette get in trouble at one point for making steroid jokes directed at the Road Warriors? How was Dusty able to get away with it? Dumb question. He's the booker. He can get away with anything. I just kind of thought it was an unspoken rule that you're not supposed to call out the boys for popping pills or using substances. Especially with the hostile nature of the airport travel. So then we had the reveal of Gary Hart's big black surprise. And it was not, in fact, his mother-in-law. Yeah, they didn't drop this. Remember a few weeks ago he was talking about bringing in a big bad black surprise? Well, we got our disclosure this week. And he wasn't lying. Abdullah the Butcher. Yep. I completely forgot Abdullah the Butcher had a run in NWA in late 88. But here he was. With his curly-toed boots and out-of-control personality. And this was indeed an Abdullah match. He was about as unhinged as you remember him being. Minus the use of forks. He's basically what Jon Moxley only dreams he could ever be. A lethal, scary-looking badass with believability. That's it. So Abdullah beat up Dave Isley. Just killed him. Stomped the shit out of him. Ran him into the ring post. Bit him in the face. Stabbed him in the eye socket. Like I said, the only thing missing from the equation is jabbing a guy's face with kitchen utensils. He would have had all his bases covered. And he eventually won with an elbow drop. An elbow drop. Probably the least fatal thing he did in the entire match. And that bled into this awesome post-match interview where, I'm not kidding you, David Crockett began his line of questioning by asking Gary, Gary, I'm not so sure about this thing. Agreed. This was so incredibly amazing. So Gary's putting over the story that Abdullah is the most feared man in all of wrestling. He has a legacy that's unlike any other man in the sport. And anybody that tries to insinuate they don't fear Abdullah is either lying or they're crazy. And like, that's all fine and good. While Gary is in the middle of this promo, you see Abdullah in the backdrop. This is brilliant camera work. First, he's leaning over the ropes, biting and gnawing on them. Then he reaches through the ropes and grabs the microphone so he can start chewing on it. At some point here, Gary reaches over and kisses Abdullah on the head while he's saying that nobody's safe in the NWA as long as he's around. At which point, you see Abdullah start licking Gary on the side of his face. What do you even say? Like, words cannot begin to describe a guy like Abdullah the Butcher. He is the exact kind of talent that all the garbage hardcore wrestlers try to imitate in today's market, but epically fail at doing so. Moxley, Nick Gage. Name any so-called hardcore badass or outlaw goofball that intentionally lights themselves on fire or puts themselves through glass tables. They would all shit their pants if they ever have to step into a ring with Abdullah the Butcher. There was nobody else like him in the business. God bless him, he's still alive today. I don't know how, considering all the torture that guy's put his body through over the years. But he was absolutely a one-of-a-kind. That led us to Mike Rotunda and Bob Emery for the TV title. Aside from Rotunda going over with a butterfly suplex, the only other thing of note here was Rotunda dumping Emery out to the floor so Steiner and Sullivan could gang up on him. But every time Rotunda would throw him out, Steiner would intentionally just roll Emery back into the ring. And Sullivan kept getting pissed at him. I presume he was just mad that Steiner refused to ghetto stomp Emery and cheat behind the ref's back. But it's like JR said here. Steiner is way too much of a nice guy to handle business that way. Now led to the post-match promo. And this is actually pretty funny. You can tell they're clearly ad-libbing at the beginning. Steiner's just acting like a petulant man-child. Eventually he goes, "Say, Kevin, why aren't you wearing that jacket I got you?" Now remember, a couple weeks back on television, they did a segment where Steiner bought Sullivan a Letterman jacket. And then just to spite him, Rotunda also bought Sullivan a Letterman jacket with the Syracuse logo on it. And then Sullivan immediately rejected Rick's jacket. So Sullivan, of course, is wearing the Syracuse jacket here. He just casually responds to Rick, "Yours didn't fit." And then he just goes into his dialogue. I was like, what an asshole. It didn't fit. So, albeit I kind of spaced out a little bit here on what Kevin said. I know he mentioned something about Ric Flair defending the world title on TV next week, and then he and Rotunda got mad that Rick Steiner didn't have his Florida heavyweight title or something. And, well, then Rick asked if he was getting the title shot against Flair. And then he and Sullivan left. Sullivan started slapping Steiner on the back of the head. At which point, Rotunda put over that he is now the number one guy in the varsity club, which would make Dr. Death the number 2. since he's the most recent recruit. Hold on. Back up. Excuse me? Dr. Death joined the varsity club? I mean, yeah, obviously. I know Dr. Death joins the varsity club. That's part of the storyline eventually, but do they ever show or explain how they came to be on television? He was a babyface last we checked, correct? They just casually threw that out there like everybody already knew. Okay, then. And again, it's more of the same when it comes to the prolonged Rick Steiner face turn. Crowd chanted, hit him, Steiner, hit him. But he did not get physical with Sullivan or Rotunda here. But I'm telling you, man, these varsity club segments, they're becoming more glorified sitcoms every week. I'm half expecting them to have a canned laugh track next time we see them on the studio show. And then we close it out with a Sheep Herders versus Jerry Price Rick Allen squash. The Sheep Herders now have wacky Jamaican theme music. I have no idea why. They beat up the job guys for a few minutes and won with a double gut buster. And then they did the best promo ever with the best whiteboard drawing I've ever seen. I'm not kidding you. This is a real thing that happened. While they're at the podium talking about the U.S. Tag Title Tournament and how garbage the United States is, there's a drawing of Luke, Butch, and Rip's heads. A New Zealand flag placed over a map of the United States. And then underneath the map is a toilet and a giant wad of toilet paper. Because it wasn't enough that the New Zealanders explained that the U.S. is utter shit. They had to have visual representation to explain it further. Just to make sure we got the point. I just love how they took the time to draw a picture with all this detail on it. Literally for a 45-second promo on television where we couldn't even see the goddamn whiteboard the majority of the time. This is the moment that made me realize this is why I still love pro wrestling to this day. For stupid, campy moments like this. And I know I kind of spoke ill of the show at the beginning when I was going over the general repetitive nature of the studio show at the moment. To be fair, though, there was a lot of good stuff on the show this week. I mean, the Midnight's angle obviously being the big one. But I enjoyed a lot of the other stuff, too. Everybody seemed to be less on autopilot mode this time. I mean, last week, I know it was a shorter show, but everybody just seemed like they didn't want to be there. But this show had energy. It had a bump. And we still got a lot of time between now and Starrcade. It's still going to be hard to keep a lot of these shows interesting until then. But I saw the effort this week. And that was a positive change. Well, I can tell you one thing about Midsouth at the moment, especially after last week's events. That dark, overcast cloud surrounding the region, it's finally been lifted. We have a new North American champion in the form of the Junkyard Dog. You know, Bill Watts is proud that Midsouth management stepped up to the plate and made sure to fully represent the people. You remember 3 weeks ago, they wanted Hacksaw Butch Reed to wrestle JYD for the North American title. And Reed tried to throw it back in everyone's face by saying, "Nah, that doesn't work for me, brother." And obviously we tracked the series of events that led to Magnum TA winning the title for a short period, and then Nikolai Volkoff winning it temporarily. The whole thing was a hot mess. But at the end of the day, the belt was given back to Reed so that he would be forced to wrestle the man that, well, the people picked. And obviously the one wrestler that Reed's been trying to avoid. So that was what Watts and Pierce covered in the first several minutes of the program, recapping the closing minutes of that title change. Also making sure to emphasize Dusty's role in that match, since he was an integral part to the whole story, him being the hand-selected special guest referee. And it was actually good foreshadowing into this week's show, because he was a real central focus of this week's story. And like we covered last week, it was a very convoluted story with a lot of twists and turns to get there. But at least we know who the real North American champion is. To the chagrin of Hacksaw Reed, one would presume. Actually, I take that back. As we learned in the segment that followed here, I don't think Hacksaw Reed was angry at all. Yeah, he lost the North American title clean as a sheet to the Junkyard Dog the other week. But damn it all, he still got the Mid-South tag titles. It's a championship belt of some description. So he's not pissed. And in fact, one could argue he was noticeably cheerful. He's standing there during the ring intros with Reeser Bowden, sporting his half of the tag title, going, "Yeah, baby, I'm the man." You know, you can't shame him for it. So we had Reed and Jim Neidhart defending the straps against Hacksaw Duggan and Dusty Rhodes. Whew. A lot of star power in this match. And yes, I did properly pronounce Neidhart's name this time. It's Neidhart, not Neidhart. Damn it, Bill. So they pretty much let us know from the beginning here, this was the match for this week's program. Everything else they had booked were essentially standby matches. I think Watts noted 5 in total. So, you know, they put this on first to make sure it got ample amount of time. Hopefully with a conclusive finish, but well, if you know the talents involved here, it wasn't going to be easy convincing any of these guys to do a job for the other. You know, overall the match is fine. A couple weird, clunky miscues at various points. But, you know, those are more over spots that you would actively have to pay attention to in order to even notice. But the heels got to work over Duggan for a little bit of the heat. Dusty made the valiant comeback at the end. A lot of flip-flop and flying going on at the end there. I love that Watts used the famous quote, "Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee." Yeah, we've heard that a handful of times during Dusty promos on the TBS Superstation. But obviously the ending here is the main talking point. So after things break down with all 4 guys, you get Hacksaw Reed pulling Dusty out to the floor. And while those two are going at it, Johnny Martinez is stuck dealing with Duggan and Neidhart. So he doesn't see as Nikolai Volkoff runs in from behind and clobbers Dusty over the head with a giant bag of wheat. What we were told was a solid 100 pounds of wheat. That part actually made me laugh because I just think, you know, even if that was 100 pounds and Dusty somehow managed to survive getting struck in the back of the head with 100 pounds of solid wheat in a bag, let's suspend disbelief long enough and pretend that's even remotely possible. I know Nikolai was a strong motherfucker, but him effortlessly carrying 100 pounds of wheat down the steps from the Irish McNeil Boys Club locker room, across the gym floor, easily hoisting the bag overhead and then dropping it over Dusty's head. By the way, small note here, not a single ounce of wheat actually fell out of the bag. The bag was basically gimmicked to split in half, but that was it. Nothing actually came out. The point in all this is, I'm having a hard time buying this one. I'm thinking Nikolai wasn't actually carrying 100 pounds of weed with him to do this run-in spot. But call me a skeptic. I mean, all kidding aside, the angle itself was good. Dusty sort of like he was dead, so that at least made sense. You know, meanwhile, Duggan's in the ring getting destroyed until Magnum and JYD run out to lend a hand. And amidst this chaotic brawl where guys are getting struck in the back of the head with large bags of wheat and other guys are in the ring stomping and beating the shit out of other guys, I had to point out Reeser just nonchalantly pacing toward the ring to try and get Johnny Martinez to grab the tag belts from him. Like, hey Johnny, I know you're busy at the moment here, but you mind grabbing these tag straps? All the while, Magnum and JYD are just running past him to try to make the save for Duggan. But Reeser's got his priorities straight. Got to make sure Reed and Neidhart get their belts back. So yeah, this whole segment was awesome. If not for anything, the inadvertent moments of comedy. So from there, I could pretty much write off the rest of the show. Then came our series of standbys that were basically there to fill the remainder of TV time. We had the Junkyard Dog squaring off with Bobby Duncombe Sr. In my efforts to try to hone in on Watts' commentary here, I'll be honest, I couldn't figure out what the hell he was talking about. He was mentioning something about how Midsouth officials are only so effective at breaking up fights with the boys, especially during moments like what we saw in the previous match. And then he starts going off into this rant about how even if referees had the physical capacity to get involved with the athletes, they shouldn't even be officiating to begin with. They should be wrestling. Meanwhile, I'm like, you know, when I look at the state of a lot of pro wrestlers today, I'd hedge my bets that the referees could kick their ass in most of the instances. Like, come on. You're telling me Aubrey Edwards couldn't kick the shit out of Jack Perry? Or Danny Garcia? Or Adam fucking Cole? Jesus Christ, have you seen the state of him lately? Please. Her arms are bigger than their fucking thighs. So albeit that comment did not age well 30-something years later. Who'd have ever thunk it? We would get to a point in wrestling where the pro wrestlers themselves would shrink and the referees would actually grow in size. I mean, aside from that, there's nothing else to talk about here. Dog looks physically incapable of doing anything. He gave Duncan a moderately impressive stiff punch to the jaw at one point. Then he won with a thump like a minute later. But according to Boyd Pierce, he is in great peak physical condition. Yeah. And I have the potential to be a competitive bodybuilder someday. So then we had Nikolai Volkoff versus King Cobra. Again, not really much to say about this one either. The ending was kind of interesting. It wasn't already conclusive enough after Nikolai had given Cobra the signature backbreaker. He then had to follow with a butterfly suplex. And that got him the 3. It was a very impressive looking butterfly throw. He actually heaved Cobra halfway across the ring with it. Poor guy landed right on his fucking tailbone. But yeah, really nothing else to note about that one. There was, however, something to note about the follow-up angle that happened during the commercial break. So as we come back, we pitched to a pre-tape where Hacksaw Reed had come down to the ring with a bucket of yellow paint and a brush. Poor King Cobra still laid out from the previous bout. So Reed seizes this as an opportunity to send a message to the dog. He starts by teeing off on a defenseless Cobra. Referees are trying to get him out of the ring, to no avail. And he ends up draping Cobra over the rope so he can paint a large yellow streak down the guy's back. And, well, it's like Watts said, a picture is worth 1,000 words. That message is loud and clear. The issues between Dog and Reed are far from settled. I'm thinking Reed's going to have other issues to attend to. Especially with how Midsouth punishes him for his actions here. Because, well, this was back during a time when talents received ramifications for being unprofessional. Hard to believe that used to be a thing. Then we had Tom Stanton versus Lanny Poffo. Another simple enhancement win for Lanny here. He went over with a moonsault out of the corner. Literally nothing else to say. And that actually led to the other angle on Mid-South television this week. It was actually more follow-up to what we saw in the opening tag. But we had a later story going on here. First, we had a designated protest request from Nikolai Volkoff. He's stewing over having his North American Championship stripped from him. So he's in the ring with the Reeser, calling out the Mid-South team as cowards. Just like all the typical Americans. Instead of having somebody come out to fight Nikolai man-to-man and take the belt from him justly, Mid-South management stripped it away from him like a bunch of petty thefts. And, well, it's great here because the whole premise of the promo is Americans are cowards, Russia is superior. Like all the typical lingo you would expect to hear in pro wrestling angles. At the same time, though, if you actually listen to the dialogue here and think about it from Nikolai's perspective, he does have some valid claims. Even if he was never officially recognized as a North American champion, he does have an argument against Mid-South stripping him of the belt without allowing him to defend it first. Even if he's wrong in the equation, you think, well, okay, but at least let the guy be factored in as a suitable challenger for the belt. Not that I'm trying to defend the dishonorable Russian adversary, but, well, we can at least call a spade a spade. So while he's ranting and raving, preaching about how much America sucks, in from behind comes Dusty Rhodes with a neck brace. Now, they told us earlier in the program that he had been transported out of the building and taken to a hospital for evaluation. Apparently, we were intended to believe that Dusty hijacked the ambulance and then drove it all the way back to the Irish Menil Boys Club. Because that's kind of what I got out of this. And or he walked. But here he was, showing up and sending Nikolai packing after running his mouth. Oddly convenient timing. And of course, now Dusty deliberately has on an I Love USA t-shirt. Like he just happened to have that shirt in his bag when he drove to the building. And then he just so happened to be wearing it during a segment where Nikolai was spouting anti-American rhetoric. Very interesting. Dusty must be a psychic. No, all seriousness though. I was never going to be able to do this promo justice by trying to recap it. So I went ahead and recorded the audio clip here to play it back. This was Dusty Rhodes' response to Nikolai's anti-America promo.
I was born an American citizen. And my daddy died in this country here. And I've always been a big fan of the dogs, Dugan and everybody. But I tell you what, and you write it down in your book, this country belongs to the free. Russia is not part of my repertoire. When I watch TV, Volkoff, and we put a man on the moon, and y'all can't even come close, then that's awesome. And when I see my baby walk across this free earth, that's awesome. And when I see people like the wrestling fans, no matter what damn color they are, that's awesome. And Volkoff, I'm awesome. I am America. I am free. I am life. I am liberty. And thank God I don't have to live in a country like you do. One time. A lot of people died in other countries to make this country free. And Dog, and Dugan, and Alan, you stand back. Because this was mine, baby. Volkoff, you're mine. The American dream.
Hard to argue against any of that, brother. And just like Watson Pierce noted here before the break, nothing to add. It's super rare that somebody can leave Bill Watts speechless. But if anybody was capable of doing it, Big Dust was among those people. So then we had a match straight out of Dallas in 1984. The Missing Link versus the Iceman King Parsons. You know, funny enough, if I actually went back to check the archives, it is entirely possible we did review this exact same match in World Class at some point. If I did a side-by-side, I would venture a guess the quality of the match was not much different in terms of the work from both guys. I mean, I love the Iceman, but he ain't getting anything remotely watchable out of the Missing Link. I mean, they only had about 3 minutes of airtime at the time this match got underway. It was cool, though, because while the match was in progress, they were shooting off fireworks at the fairgrounds. So you just hear these loud boom effects going off in the background while the Iceman and Link are doing spots. Of course, Watts had to make sure he pointed out, this is not a Russian invasion, people. Nothing to fear. It was a nice effect, though. I did not expect fireworks to be sounding off in the middle of a Midsouth taping. But Iceman ended up going over with the Rumper Thumper. His finishing hip attack, for anybody that didn't know. A much better name than the Butt. But don't tell Bill Mercer that. Like I talked about at the beginning, though, the show was mainly centered around that opening tag match and all the consequent angles with Dusty they shot. I know. Yeah, the Dusty haters are going to come out of the woodwork now and bitch up a storm. Oh, of course the show was all about Dusty. What else is new? That fat egomaniac. Well, in all fairness, note the timeline. The year is 1983, not 1988. Just throwing it out there. But it was well done. I mean, Dusty's promo was all kinds of legendary, dude. I mean, you know that when I actually take the time to screen cap the audio, even I can't muster up the words to describe how great it is. It's a very timely promo, too, considering we just had an election held this past week. Prophetic words have never been more truly spoken. But, yeah, that was awesome. And it kind of makes you sad when you think about the promos we get today by comparison. I mean, dude, you don't hear shit like that in wrestling anymore. And there's no way you could format or script anything like that. And you damn sure don't have the personalities like Dusty doing promos like that in 2024. God bless Cody, but, yeah, even he's not in the same class of promo skill as his dad. He might like to think he is. But, trust me, he's not. I mean, I listen to Cody promos occasionally if I stumble across a Raw or a SmackDown clip. There's a reason people are speculative that he might end up turning the crowd against him at some point. Y'all thought it wasn't possible after the AEW run. You obviously know nothing about the nature of modern wrestling fans in 2024. Story time for another time, though. Let's close things out here by taking a look at World Class's offerings from this week in history. Now that we've seen all the Cotton Bowl footage, we're well into our next series of tapings here for television. And we've seen quite a bit of activity happen just within the last couple weeks. We've had the return of Rick Rude to the Dallas area. Last week, the one-man gang turn on Gary Hart and the rest of his crew. We've obviously had the ongoing issues between Sunshine and Missy Hyatt. All the while, Scott Casey's embroiled with a series of problems with the Great Kabuki and John Tatum. So there are some storylines going on. It is kind of interesting how the Von Erichs aren't really part of any of the major stories at the moment. At least coming out of the Cotton Bowl event. I mean, they've shaved the heads of Gino Hernandez and Chris Adams. They've introduced Lance Von Erich to the show, which, oh, there's a lot to be said about his run. But Kevin and Kerry are sort of background players right now. It's very interesting. But like I said, there's definitely some new feuds they're developing. And that is a good thing, because Lord knows we've needed it for quite a while. A fresh coat of paint, if you will. I can tell you what we didn't need. It was Rick McCord wrestling Billy Ash for 11 minutes. Just... why? Why would you do this? Who in their right mind thought this was a good idea? I'm not even complaining about Rick McCord having a match. But who the fuck wanted to watch two underneath guys wrestle a boring back and forth match with no heat for 10 minutes? Over 10 minutes at that. Even the Dallas crowd didn't give a shit. Of course, the wrong guy won, too. I'll get to that in a sec. To tell you the truth, I was more annoyed listening to Bill Mercer's static headset. I don't know what was going on with the audio in this match, but I almost had to mute the whole thing. Just non-stop static white noise for like the first 5 minutes. Didn't help that Mercer was actually trying to plug some shows and live events as well. So if you're watching the show hoping to get some insight on the upcoming series of world-class events, you just have to ignore the loud, obnoxious So yeah, like I said, McCord and Ash did some back and forth stuff for a while. By a while, I mean approximately 48 hours. Again, crowd is totally dead for the most part. There was the occasional 4 people that try to start a "Go Rig Go" chant. And that lasted about as long as the Anglo-Zanzibar War from the 1800s. Actually, that war went at least an hour, so I'm still wrong. The chanting from McCord lasted about 45 seconds and the people gave up. And like I said, even after McCord made the valiant comeback and did all the crowd-pleasing babyface spots, they still had Billy Ash cut him off and pin him flatter than 4 o'clock. Then all the people went, ugh. Fuck off. To my knowledge, I don't think we've ever seen Bill Ash work a world-class show before. I mean, at least Rick McCord's gotten a couple showcases on his own. So I have no idea why the hell they put over Ash. But, yeah, that was the first 12 minutes of the show this week. Then we came back for an awesome pre-tape. After 2 weeks of suspense, we finally met Percival Pringle III at, of all places, his and Rude's apartment complex in southern Texas. And, well, she was a doozy. A fixer-upper, one might claim. Kind of resembled something equivalent to your mother's basement. Come on, Percy. You and Rude has sufficient funds to afford better. The fuck was this place? Looked horrible. You know what else looked horrible? Percy sporting a bleach blonde head of hair with bleach blonde eyebrows. It's one of those odd things where when your only visuals of Percy on camera is back when he had dark brown or even jet black hair, it's almost unsettling to look at him when he had the polar opposite hair color. There was no way this was his natural head of hair. Actually, wasn't he a redhead? I can't remember what his natural hair color was, but there's no way it was blonde. God love him, though, he was still Percy Pringle. Oh, and making sure to correct Mercer here from the beginning, when he tried to refer to him as Percy, it is indeed Percival Pringle III. Bitch. Oh, by the way, before I neglect to mention it, apparently Rick Rude recently won the American Heavyweight title, which, I mean, I remember was a thing. I just didn't realize it happened so soon. I mean, he's been in Dallas for, what, 3 weeks? And he's already captured the top regional belt in the territory. And on top of Pringle being proud to represent Rick Rude as the face of World Class, he's actually got a few other surprises in store for us, including a potential cast of other characters to the area, what he is trying to assemble as his Pringle Dynasty. And while he's not letting us in on the scoop of who those individuals are, he assures us that they're going to make him a lot of money. And as for King Parsons, the former American heavyweight champion, well, he's better suited to revert back to ice picking at his old job, because Rude is the face of the promotion now. Rude also wanted to inform everybody his finishing name, a very famous move that became synonymous with his career, his patented DDT, he is now calling the Rude Awakening. The Rude Awakening. Get it? It's punny. See, I love this segment. I don't love Percy's blonde hair, but I love this segment nonetheless. And that brought us to Rick Rude versus Mike Reed back at the Sportatorium. And yes, we did have Percy accompanying Rude in his corner this week. He was sure to let the Dallas faithful know that he hated them as well. So I take it some people were heckling him. He was definitely vocal at ringside with Rude here. Even the house mic was picking up on Percy's audio throughout the match. So Rude spent a while beating up Reed and playing with his food. And ended up getting the W with his Rude Awakening DDT. Had to make sure we emphasize the importance of that name. Would not want to downplay Rick Rude's finish. Of course, I also don't need to mention Rude's jacked physique. A body that would make prime Lex Luger start fat-shaming himself. I actually think Rude may have had less body fat percentage than Luger, now that I think about it. Did we ever get a Rick Rude versus Lex Luger match? I have to imagine they at least crossed paths, right? Sometime between 91 and 92, right before Luger left for the WWF. I know they were conspicuously kept apart during their Crockett runs in 87. Although, to be fair, they were only really under the same roof for, 4 or 5 months? What I would have paid to see a pose-down segment between those two would have been fucking wild. Then we had another awesome segment. It's Kevin Von Erich versus Chris Adams. And under normal circumstances, I'd have rolled my eyes at the idea of having to watch yet another goddamn Kevin Von Erich Chris Adams match. Especially when we've already seen 387 of these matches in just the last year alone. However, this was different. It's our first time seeing Chris Adams on television wrestling under a lucha mask. Obviously because he just got his head shaved from the Texas Stadium event. So underneath that legendary mask is a big old shiner. A cue ball cranium, so to speak. So he's trying to hide that from public consumption. It's not the classic Buddy Roberts gimmick from a couple years ago where he was out there sporting a fake wig under a wrestling helmet. In fact, I would argue Chris is taking extra precaution. He's going with a full-fledged mask. So as you might imagine, the whole story was Kevin attempting to go after the mask and exploit his bald head. And it basically threw off Chris's psychology for the entire match. In his efforts to play keep away and avoid letting Kevin get his hands on him. I mean, he really couldn't muster up any offense. He's also got the crowd mocking him with chanting, "We want the mask! We want the mask!" So that didn't help. He did eventually manage to use some of his wrist tape to cut off Kevin and get the advantage. But Kevin was mostly in control the whole time. But the last couple minutes is the real talking point here. As soon as Gino Hernandez showed up with a duplicate lucha mask, a light bulb went off. I was like, yep, I know exactly what they're going to do here for a finish. Sure enough, Kevin sends Chris out to the floor. And while Bronco has his back turned momentarily, Gino quickly slides into the ring and catches Kevin off guard when he wasn't paying attention. As he counters a shoot-off, he gets Kevin trapped in a cradle pinning predicament. 1, 2, 3. The heels pulled a fast one here. It's so awesome. And what makes the whole thing perfect is that in order to pull something like this off, you have to have two guys that are of similar build and stature. Chris and Gino were basically the same height and weight. So unless Bronco was actively looking for any physical discrepancies in the match, there's no way he would have even noticed. For 20 seconds Gino was in there? So it was perfect. What a great way for the heels to get their heat back after that Cotton Bowl fiasco. They put together a little strategy here and got back at the Von Erichs for the head shaving. And now we've got a big issue at play here with the Von Erich versus Gino Chris saga. They're going to have to really pay attention to any time the heels try to pull a voodoo twin magic spell. So you know that's going to be on the Von Erichs' radar. Great stuff. And that led to our main event feature. What they initially advertised as the one-man gang versus Bruiser Brody. Well, that ended up turning into the gang versus Kerry Von Erich instead. Due to a delayed flight cancellation with Brody traveling from Japan. Which may or may have not been true, I really don't know. But as the gang tried to gloat and call Brody and the Texas fans yellow belly cowards, that didn't take too well to Kerry. So he came out to defend the honor of the Dallas faithful. Told gang to see if he can handle Kerry in a fight. Since he's all about making an example out of the Dallas roster by himself. And that's an important factor to keep in mind, too, from last week. Even though the gang did turn on Gary Hart, he established in that promo that he's only out for himself now. So he's still a heel, technically. So he and Kerry had an old school monster heel versus white meat underdog babyface match for a while. You had Kerry running wild at the beginning and getting a flurry of offense going. Gang eventually took over and used the power game to overtake Kerry. And it got to the point where both guys spill out to the floor. They're fighting over by the announce desk, wrapping cable cords around each other. And Rick Hazard can't get either guy back into the ring. So he throws the match out and calls it a double DQ. Then as things carry over into the afterbirth, several of the babyfaces run out to try to separate both guys. It was actually them holding Gang back, which left Kerry wide open to run over and punch Gang in the face. So they were a little prejudiced here. But that was it. A no contest finish to a match that really wasn't even much of a match. It was just a prolonged TV angle. But it was fine. I'd have preferred seeing the bigger hoss fight between Brody and the gang, but maybe they'll save that for a rainier day. We'll see. Other than the opening 12-minute snooze fest with Bill Ash and Rick McCord, it was a solid showing this week. Again, they're piecing together a lot of new stories. And in the case of the Von Erich versus Gino Chris feud, kind of moving it on to the next chapter, now that Gino and Chris have introduced the masks as part of the storyline. Looks like Gang's going to be feuding with Kerry in the interim, which, I mean, that's fine. Rick Rude and Percy Pringle are kind of the main guys I'm looking forward to right now. They've established that Rude's the American Heavyweight Champion, so we'll see how they get him involved with the other babyfaces as we move through the taping blocks. And they are promoting the reunion arena shows. Thanksgiving and Christmas season's coming up. So, we'll see how they fill out those cards over the next month. Couple of months. But there you have it. That'll do it for this episode here. And we'll be back on Monday for the Retro Raw report. Still got a little bit of time before that next In Your House event, so I think we got a couple more weeks actually before any other Monday segment. Because I'm trying to think Survivor Series isn't even until the end of the month. I was have to double check myself because things come up pretty quickly here. Yeah, that's November 30th. So we still got a ways out. Well, it is what it is. Again, thanks everybody for checking out the show. Subscribe, comment, leave a like for me here on YouTube and Rumble, and we'll catch you guys soon for more wrestling talk. Take care. Peace out.